people. Both of these scenarios are going to require massive amounts of capital. And so the first problem that we need to solve is how to access that capital. And I've come up with a private solution and a public solution. And so I wanted to ask you senators, which one did you want me to cover first, the private solution or the public solution?
Public solution, please.
So on the public solution, we're basically going to need to work with the Guam Economic Development Authority, and we're going to have DITA do an indenture, in order to access the capital. Now, if DITA was to float a bond at this time and go through that whole process, it would take longer than the federal money on its way. However, there is one entity on the island that does have a very large capital pool, and if this entity is willing to work with the government of Guam, we can access that capital pool for mutual and make it mutually beneficial. And that entity, Madam Speaker and Senators, is the Government of Guam Retirement Fund. If the Guam Economic Development Authority drafts an indenture with the retirement fund can provide the capital necessary for us to be able to roll out a program. Now, this indenture would, of course, need to have an interest expense in order for the retirement fund to be able to stay compliant with its mandates. And so that interest expense would be funded by the $10 million in reimbursements that are due to the government of Guam for the war claims program that you ran locally. And so, just running some math, if we were to fit in with the actuarial requirements of the government of Guam Retirement Fund, they require a 7% annualized rate of return on their investments, a minimum of 7%. And so $10 million at 7% interest would provide a capitalization of about $142.8 million. I'll repeat that, a $10 million commitment as an interest capitalization would provide access to $142.8 million at a 7% interest rate. And so what would happen is DITA would go into this indenture with the retirement fund, and the government of Guam would pledge the $10 million as capitalized interest on the indenture. So the government of Guam retirement fund already would have the interest secured in that facility, and the $140 million would be what's used to capitalize the payments to our people. Now, $140 million should be sufficient, because if we take $140 million and we divide it by $1,200, which is the maximum amount of economic impact payments that are due to our people, we'll be able to fund 116,000 applications. And $1,200 is a high-end estimate, because not everybody is going to be availing of this resource. And the $1,200 is a high-end because our population also includes children, and the children, as part of the program, will only be getting $500. So I believe a $140 million facility capitalized by the retirement fund, with the interest capitalized by the pledge, the $10 million, will provide us with that access to capital for us to be able to roll out a program. Now, the way we can roll out that program is that the legislature would need to authorize DITA to be able to give out economic impact loans. And DITA would set up an application portal online that would include the applicant uploading a picture or a file copy of their 2018 or 2019 tax return. That basically will be a proving document to prove that the applicant is qualified for the funds. They also would include the applicant's assignment of their economic impact money to DITA as part of that application process. So when they go on that portal, they upload the photo of their tax return, they sign off on assigning their economic impact payment to DITA, and then DITA also on the application process should include direct deposit information, so that we're not having people going to banks and lining up, or we're not having people waiting for checks. The direct deposit would allow for DITA to then take the money in that facility and direct deposit it into the account of the applicant. DITA would validate the applications and then deposit the funds to the individual. And then afterwards, when the funds come in on the federal side, those funds get put back to DITA, and GITA uses those funds to pay down the indenture that it has with the retirement fund. Now, it could either be a full-on indenture or it could be a revolving facility. That would depend on I guess what GITA figures is the best way to be able to access that capital. That is the recommended solution that we came up with on the public side. If we wanted to have this be something that's rolled out strictly on the government's end, the benefit to this is that that interest expense is going right back into the retirement fund. And so we're not, taking public money and it's bleeding out of the government. It's going into the retirement fund, helping to fulfill their mission of paying down the unfunded liability. That's the public option. And so on that subject, I wanted to go ahead and yield to either of the senators for any questions on that.
How would the reimbursement work again?
The individual, when they apply for the economic impact loan with GITA, will also assign their economic impact payment to GITA. So when the economic payment comes in, that money gets remitted by Treasury of Guam to GITA as part of the assignment.
Can we get it straight to GITA from the feds?
I believe that I don't want to tinker with anything that's happening in terms of transactions between local and federal government, because then we're going to have to go to the federal government and get agreements and clearances, and that's going to take more time. As long as the money comes into Treasury of Guam, which it would, and the assignment is in place, then Treasury of Guam can then remit the funds to GITA. These options that I'm presenting, Madam Speaker, require no federal involvement whatsoever. These are things that we can set up entirely locally, so we're not having to go back and forth and get agreements in place with the federal government.
Congressman, I'm really, really appreciative of this course of action that may or could be taken. And I just want to ask if there was anything vetted with the committee in reference to the lawsuit that happened decades ago when the government of Guam authorized to utilize the authorization to use government of Guam retirement funds for certain programs. And I think there was a court order or a permanent injunction that was ensued and the government lost. So I just wanted to know, was this vetted through the committee and looking at it? It just served me as memory. I could be wrong. I don't have anything in front of me, but I remember this at least 16 to 18 years ago.
You're correct, Madam Speaker, and that's why this would not be an agreement directly between the government of Guam and the retirement fund. We'll be utilizing GITA as the source to create an actual bond. And so technically, the government of Guam retirement fund will be buying a Gov Guam bond, and that's how the capitalization will be coming in. And so it will be no different than if they were to be buying any other security, because that bond is basically a security instrument. So they're not giving money directly to the government. They're purchasing an investment that has a 7% interest that the government is guaranteeing with the 10 million. And so that basically is a legitimate transaction with the retirement fund, because they're purchasing a debt instrument. They're not just handing money over to the government of Guam.
Thank you.
And that's why it would need to be structured in that way, because of that very thing that you brought up, Madam Speaker. And that's and good eye, because we thought about that too, and we realized that it needed to be an actual security that the retirement fund was purchasing, so that it would be compliant with that court order.
Thank you very much, Congressman.
Congressman, this is Mary Torres. It seems to me that you're structuring what is in essence a bridge loan concept between GITA, in this case, utilizing the retirement fund, and the private citizen in anticipation of them receiving the payments from the federal government. The question that I have, though, is in a prior briefing that we had with the Department of Revenue and Taxation, the director, Daphne Shimizu, she was talking about the mechanism for the payments locally, because we don't have direct IRS. We won't be receiving something directly from the IRS. So it in essence would be DRT who will be working on providing coming up with a list and verifying SS numbers with the IRS, you know, so, because there are, after all, eligible persons to receive this aid. And what I was wondering as you're speaking about this with direct application to GITA, how then would the person or a person on Guam, or how would GITA in this case reconcile with that DRT list that they'll be compiling to establish who is eligible to receive and who isn't? Because I think that foremost is the hurdle that we have to overcome.
The GITA would not need to reconcile the DRT list if the individual is uploading a photo or a file copy of their 2018 or 2019 tax return. And that's why that part of the application process is so important, because ultimately when Tax reconciles their listing with Treasury and with IRS, they're going to be basically using the exact same documents to do that listing. What we're doing, we're kind of bypassing the DRT side, and we're letting GITA receive directly the evidence that they need in order to be able to validate the applicant. And once they do that, and the applicant assigns their payment to GITA, GITA then turns those documents over to DRT and to Treasury, the Treasury of Guam, to basically inform them that when that money does come in, those individuals, they'll still be on the list that the Treasury, the U.S. Treasury remits the funds, but when the funds come in and hit local Treasury, then they get remitted to GITA.
I see. So basically, GITA is going to assess, based on the presentation of the tax returns, what their adjusted gross income is and whether they're eligible. I mean, in essence, that's the first tier of discretion then from GITA? That's correct.
And we're able to do that because the federal government made very clear outlines on who's eligible. And so we don't need to reinvent the wheel in terms of authorization criteria or qualifications of applicants. We just need to look at those tax returns and be able to say, okay, they're below the income threshold. Okay, they have SS numbers, and okay, this is the fixed amount for those kinds of applications. And so they'll be able to fund them in that way. But yes, GITA would have a pretty big job of having to vet these applications. And you know, the reality is we have a lot of Government of Guam employees who are basically all teleworking or no one's really in the office. This would require the administration to also be able to get the necessary non-disclosure agreements in place with various Government of Guam employees and involve them in the vetting process if we wanted to have more eyes combing through more applications as quickly as possible. So as you can see, the public option has some pluses in that the funds will be going into the retirement fund and staying within the public sector. But it does present some challenges because the local government would be having to vet a lot of applications, and that's going to require an infrastructure build out on the local government side.
Thank you, Congressman. I do appreciate that. I think that's an excellent idea, something we would have control in. Recently, we had a briefing where our agency heads were dealing with the frustrations of not having control and awaiting some more federal guidelines. But at least in this case, where you're presenting, at least on the public side, I find this very interesting and a solution that I see where it will require the manpower, but we have control of it here. We can take it forward from here, and I think that's a great possible solution. I thank you for that. Looking forward to the private side as well to see which is the best end we can work with. But thank you, Congressman.
Okay, great. Am I able to move on to the private option now?
Okay. I guess just one more question. If this were to happen, is there guidance for those with disabilities who are exempt from filing? Would that also be included into this equation?
I'll be the first to admit that this program is not perfect in that there's going to be a lot of people out there who have needs that we're not going to be able to meet altogether. But this will help a significant segment of the population that's able to do the validations in accordance with the program. If there's individuals who are receiving Social Security or Social Security disability income, they should be getting paid directly from the federal government. because the Social Security Administration should be forwarding their names to the Treasury, and Treasury should be direct depositing those checks through their process on the federal side. So basically, no, I wouldn't see this process creating a window for anything outside of the very narrow parameters of those who have 2018 or 2019 tax filings and SS numbers and are able to upload a photo or a file copy of their filed tax return. It's important for us to kind of stay within the lines on this, because the documentation is necessary to validate that the funds are eventually going to come in, and that's necessary for us to be able to, at the end of the day, make good on the indenture that the government of Guam has structured through GITA with the retirement fund.
And I guess, Congressman, if I may also, before we go into the private sector proposal, just a question to see, as oversight chair of retirement, was there a collaboration or communication with the committee or the commission members of retirement on Executive Director Paula, just to see where we could possibly see the proposal moving forward from the government perspective?
To be perfectly honest, Speaker, I mean, I'm out here doing the federal work.
If you're willing to do this presentation to see, as their members, as the board of directors do have an in-depth knowledge of the retirement fund, of the program and how it moves. And I'm just hoping that as the oversight chair, that maybe we could have, if we were to move that route, maybe we could at least look at having this presentation with them.
Absolutely, and that's something that I would recommend that you guys do on your end. Again, this is not going to, these proposals that I have here, they don't involve any federal work. I'm just kind of bringing this to your attention as options because of the need that our people are expressing for us to expedite this. And so absolutely dot your I's and cross your T's and sit down and talk with the retirement fund folks and find out if this is something they're willing to do. Personally, if I was in the commission, I would look at this as a win-win. This is an opportunity for the retirement fund to be able to assist our people, and also for them to be able to get a guaranteed 7% rate of return in a market that right now is very unpredictable and might continue to decline. And so we have the guaranteed interest in the $10 million coming in, and that's a guaranteed 7% rate of return for the retirement fund in this current investment environment. So I would fancy that they would be interested in this. But again, you're right. Absolutely, the local government will need to sit down and talk to the retirement fund and find out if they would actually be interested in capitalizing something like this.
Thank you, Congressman.
Congressman, one last point too is I think you started this discussion by talking about the timeline and the need to expedite funds into people's hands who desperately need them. So in considering what you're proposing, the only factor I think that would make this an avenue to explore would be whether we could fast track and perform in advance of what the federal government would be able to do in terms of releasing funds to DRT, who then releases funds locally. And as I'm aware, I believe that this economic impact stimulus payment package was signed around March the 27th, with a 2-week window for the Treasury to come up with the guidelines. So the guidelines are not expected to be rolled out and presented to Congress until about April 11th, right? So, and I think that's where a lot of the anxiety is coming, is in terms of what is the realization of money into people's pockets. And so if this were even a feasible option for a type of bridge financing to our local people, then the challenge for us would be then to beat the timeline that would come, that would be the federal government's timeline, versus if we were to orchestrate a local advanced bridge financing. Logistically, I think right now the first challenge, as you recommend, would be for us to vet it with the retirement fund board and GITA. And on top of everything else, just determine whether that system in concert with DRT is actually going to play out. Certainly a challenge for us to look at, and I think if anything, you know, I welcome the idea. It's just the kinks now that we have to sort out, but I just wanted to make that comment. Thank you.
And that is an accurate assessment, and there's there's a lot of different things that are floating around right now on the federal side that have me concerned about that timeline because the infrastructure out here working this through the IRS is that Treasury is going to remit the funds to IRS, and IRS is going to direct deposit those funds to the taxpayers that qualify. And we don't have that infrastructure set up. We don't have direct deposit set up, and we're going to have to reconcile our lists with Treasury and with IRS, and all those things are going to take time. And so on top of the federal timelines, which everyone is already finding frustrating, we're still going to have unique hurdles to jump through on our local side because our Department of Revenue and Taxation is separate and apart from the Internal Revenue Service, and the validations that are going to be required in order to get that to happen, and then whether or not the mailing of checks is going to create an additional delay in terms of the funds being remitted to Treasury, and then Treasury of Guam having to run the checks, validate that, and then get them mailed out to people, and then for it to go through the Postal Service. So there's a lot of additional timelines on this being done under the status quo, and that's why we're having the conversation because I'm not comfortable that the current rate at which this is progressing is going to move at a pace that's going to meet the needs of our people that are getting more and more desperate by the day. And so this first option that we're talking about, this public option, it does have a lot of work that needs to be done on the local side. But the sooner we can get on with it, the sooner we can get the program on. And if we get the application portal up through GITA and get those things processing in simultaneously with the funds being acquired and remitted by the retirement fund, and simultaneously with GITA drafting up the indenture. Once we have all the commitments on the table, all the local parts at the same time. And as Senator Moylan pointed out, it's within our control, and that will allow us to move as fast as we're able to move versus kind of, waiting and trying to navigate the interplay between the local and federal government that we're having to deal with right now.
Congressman, based if this program were to move forward, can you explain if child support, taxes, GMH bills, and other bills out there owed to the government, would those be garnished, or would this be included as far as, I mean, those will not be included in this program moving forward?
The economic impact payments are exempt from any garnishment with the exception of child support. And so that's something that we probably want to include in the vetting process of the applications of GITA, having them cross-reference applications with any listing that the Attorney General's office may be able to provide with respect to those people who have child support in arrears.
Thank you. Maybe just one more. So the difference between, there was a bill that was introduced by my colleagues was that said, let's try and use local funds and then try to get reimbursed from the federal government. How would that relate to moving forward? Is it because this is an indenture and not a borrowing straight from the local funds?
This does not involve the federal government in any way. This is basically a financing mechanism that is having individuals assign their economic impact money that we are validating they're going to receive. And so when that money comes in at the local level, that's when the money gets moved to where it needs to go. And so this would not require any interaction with the federal government in order to set up.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I would also recommend against any kind of program that would require us to, in a creative way, work something out with the federal government, because I mean, it's kind of crazy out here with them trying to set up their own programs with everything that's been passed. trying to reinvent the wheel, so to speak, I think would create more hurdles and might cause more delay.
Thank you. So maybe at this time, Congressman, if we can look into the private perspective.
Okay, so the private option has a similar concept, except instead of capitalizing the money with retirement fund proceeds and using GITA as the adjudicating body on the applications, we work this through our local banking system. And so what we would do is we would need legislation for GovGuam to authorize local financial institutions to fund economic impact payment loans that are conforming. And in order for them to be conforming, the applicant has to have a 2018 or 2019 copy of their tax return included in the application along with their SS number. And the applicant needs to assign their economic impact payment to the financial institution. GovGuam would then remit the bank assignments to the respective banks when the federal money comes in, along with a 5% or a 7% interest. And so it's pretty much the same thing. The people will be able to go to their local bank. I would recommend that part of the mandate, though, would be that participating financial institutions must enable online applications that include direct deposit. And so people will be able to go online, apply for these economic impact loans of their bank. In the application, they will assign their federal economic impact payment to the bank. And so those assignments would then be put by the bank to Rev and Tax or the Treasury. And so when the federal money comes in, instead of the individual receiving the economic impact payment, it goes to the bank. And at the point of funding on the bank assignment, that's when the local government will add on the percentage interest. And so the same $10 million will capitalize the interest that will be paid on these economic impact loans that are issued by these financial institutions. And so the people of Guam, when they go in and apply for this, they basically will be a 0% loan to the individual. The government of Guam will be paying, I would say 5% is a decent figure, because when banks are capitalizing their loans, when they put interest onto their loans, they do it on an annualized percentage rate. And because these loans are basically going to get funded within the next 6 months at the latest, I would just guess that basically a 5% interest rate comes out to a 10% annualized rate of return, which is a really good rate of return on a loan in the private sector. And so, and these are guaranteed loans. I would also recommend that the government of Guam write into the law that they are going to be guarantors of any of these loans that are conforming. That way the banks are comfortable giving out the loan based on the conforming criteria. And so when the economic impact payment comes in, it comes in and then the government adds the interest on top of it and remits the total amount to the bank to be able to pay off the amount that they gave out to the individual.
Like a payment loan.
Yes, exactly. But with the interest capitalized by the government of Guam and with everything pretty much guaranteed, because we know the federal money's coming in, we know how much is coming into those very specific categories. And so, it really would be a risk-free loan on the bank side. It's just a matter of having to set up their online application process and being able to process these things in that manner. But you would be putting $10 million into the local financial system, which isn't necessarily a bad thing either. We're supporting our local businesses, and we're also helping our people to get their money. And so that private option would require a lot less build out on the government of Guam side, and that's plus versus the public option. But the minus is that that 10 million in interest, instead of it being used for a government expense, is going to be basically funding the interest expense of the loan, so that the individuals who are applying for it aren't paying any interest on their application.
Congressman, the idea here is that these two proposals would be optional, right? That they would be at the taxpayer's discretion to apply for them or to just wait for DRT to go through the normal process. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Because in just looking at the practicality of this, there may be people there are many people I'm aware of who don't go through the banking system, who don't have bank accounts. And so the idea of, transacting online and that sort of thing is probably not in their normal protocol to begin with. The other thing that I wonder about is just the mechanism by an individual taking out a personal loan that is to be paid by a guarantor short of them defaulting on the loan. The logistics of how a loan typically works, I think, is part of the challenge here, because you're talking about advance payments to somebody in the guise of a loan, but the repayment of the loan is not on that person; it's on a second party. So it's I think logistically it's a little tricky, and we'd have to consult perhaps with the banking institutions to see how that can be affected, because it is a little quirky when you think about it.
Well, Senator, I do know that certain financial institutions on Guam already give out loans for tax refunds, and this would be the exact same mechanism. The only difference is that the interest on those loans will be paid by the government instead of being paid by the individual.
Okay, maybe that's where I look, because I'm not aware of that program. So thank you for that.
Yeah, my banking background kind of helps to be able to conceptualize some of these things. So, yeah, there are financial institutions that have given out tax refund loans in the past. This would be a very similar mechanism. The only difference would be that they're all online to maintain the social distancing concerns, and direct deposits, that people won't have to, get on those long lines and get to their money. They can just, go to the nearest ATM. And the interest would be paid by the government of Guam as opposed to being paid by the individual. And so when the tax refund loans, I know that financial institutions do the same thing. They have individuals sign an assignment, and they put that assignment to, I believe it's to Rev and Tax. And so when the tax refund is actually paid out, it gets paid out to the creditor. And so this would be the same thing. It will be assigning that economic impact payment to the bank. And then to make everything easier, when the economic impact payment is remitted to the bank, they just add on the 5% or the 7% interest to close out the cash advance.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Congressman, I find this one even more interesting. I can see with the private sector involved, they have the manpower as well, and we won't necessarily be straining GITA with everything else they're trying to get done at the same time. Working with this federal program and then trying to get advance payment out. This could be even a better option. I see it as these banks may also want to compete for that business. These banks may also want to advertise and get the word out that this is available for them, and to come on over to their banks, and so people can get their loans and do it online if possible, or somehow they can get the word out. They can help us get the word out for people that are in need of this money quickly. So it's another viable option. So I appreciate that. Thank you very much, Congressman.
Thank you, Senator. And so I wanted to, are there any other questions on this private option before I digress a little bit into another potential solution for some of our problems?
No, thank you very much, Congressman.
So if not, I wanted to also talk about the unemployment program, because right now the local government's in the process of setting up their unemployment program with the federal government. That's also going to take some time, and there are people who are unemployed right now. They need lifelines. They need something to be able to put food on their table. The economic impact payments will definitely help a significant segment of the population, but we still have that unemployed group. And so on that subject, both of these facilities can also be used to do cash advances on unemployment income. And it would require a different application process, and it would require some additional logistics from the government of Guam, because the Guam Department of Labor would need to, I guess, certify that somebody is unemployed within the definitions of the CARES Act, and that certification can then be used to basically validate that the Congress authorized $600 a month for about the next 4 months, on top of whatever the unemployment amounts are going to be, which is about between 300 and either 330 or 360 or $390. But that 600 is guaranteed. And so another option to consider using either of these facilities would be to do lifeline loans to individuals, where they can get a $100 cash advance on a weekly basis and use these same facilities and the certification of unemployment from Department of Labor to basically validate that when the unemployment program turns on, that money is going to be coming in, and off the top, it can go to pay off whatever cash advances those unemployed people were tapping between now and then. And so that's another mechanism, another way that these financing options can be used to provide lifeline support for the unemployed in our community.
I know, Congressman, that one of the points that was brought up to us by Department of Labor is that they presently have an online system where employers are reporting the effects of the unemployment numbers. And so they're building a real-time inventory of employees who are affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. And so as I understood it from what Department of Labor was discussing with us, the senators, in a recent conference, in addition to people reporting, there is already a bigger picture survey that's being conducted right now, so that when individuals come in, they can be cross-referenced with the employer's reporting listings, so that they don't have to go through different tiers of validation. It's their efforts in DOL, as I understand, to establish a list of affected people, starting with the employer side, and then so that it facilitates the application by the employees at the time that they come in. So I know that those efforts are underway with DOL to get ahead of the curve, so to speak. And I think that those are the measures that are so critical right now, because it's, time is really our biggest enemy right now. And if we don't arrive at practical solutions to address, these unemployment and wage issues for people, then we're gonna have it's gonna be difficult to play catch up, and we're gonna have to come up with solutions quicker than, I think, locally than to rely on the federal dollars. So it is a bit of a challenge, certainly.
Yeah, these are daunting times, Senator. And yes, the Department of Labor is working very hard to be able to build out those lists. They have I was very glad to be able to get us included in this unemployment program. That was a real big win for us, but it does create a serious logistical effort for Department of Labor to undertake. And so they're underway with that. And that's kind of why I bring this up, because as they're building those lists to be able to stand up the unemployment program, within those very same lists, they can also include, as part of the processing, a certification of unemployment that would basically validate the individual as someone who is going to be ultimately receiving unemployment compensation. And that certification can be used for them to be able to, through these same mechanisms that we talked about, if we build out a financing mechanism for lifeline loans, that they can use that certification and pledge their unemployment income that's going to be incoming to be able to access some lifeline support if we were to authorize that legislatively. Any further questions from our senators? And then I can open it up to our members of the media.
No questions for me. Thank you, Congressman.
Again, Congressman, if I may, I know that I brought this up earlier, but how does it relate in as far as the census that, that we're going through? We know that our census doesn't happen for every 10 years, but other states in the nation are having their census done every year. And they have estimates in how would that be perceived for Guam as far as capturing the real numbers. And
The census data is not being used to validate our economic impact payments of the federal government, and it's not being used to validate our unemployment program with the federal government. I know that basically our unemployment program is being validated based on the impacts that DOL is compiling, and the economic impact payments is based on the 2018-2019 tax filer lists. So the census data, at least for these programs that we're talking about on this call, would not have an impact.
I think I was reflecting on the $3 billion that was coming to DC and the territories.
Okay.
So
Yeah, those figures, the 3 billion going to the territories was based on our 2010 census data, I believe. They're not basing it on our 2020s.
because we don't have one.
Right.
I was just saying, but we know that we have an increase and an influx of a lot of our the numbers that have come in the last decade.
Yeah, and so do the other territories. I'm sure the numbers are, of course, different over these last 10 years. The federal government is just looking at the simplest way to be able to get these funds out to the various districts. And so everywhere across the country, not just the territories, they're all being factored based on their 2010 census data.
Thank you.
If that concludes our senators, T, if we can go ahead and unmute all of our members of the media and take them, I guess, one at a time, and I'll turn it over to you to moderate that.
Duly noted, Congressman.
Hi, Congressman. This is Anamita with the Pacific Daily. So I just wanted to verify that neither the public nor the private option can take into account those that do not generally file tax returns.
That is correct. And in order for us to be able to, and let me be very clear, in presenting this, I'm not trying to exclude any of our people. I'm just trying to present a solution that would allow us to structure a process that would be conforming with either an indenture on the public side or the underwriting requirements on the private side. And so in order for either of those two things to meet the standards that the indenture would set or the private sector would set, we would need to be able to prove that the money is coming in for those particular obligations. And the only way we can prove that is by using copies of 2018 or 2019 filings. And so that's why that requirement would be a part of either of these two programs. It would just be a necessary component because of the underwriting requirements for either the indenture or the private sector banking side.
Great, thank you. And I just have one follow-up. So given both that and that this would, both the private and public options would still be optional, people could still, if they so choose, wait to just receive the monies through the federally laid out program. I guess what would be the accounting mechanism, or what entity would do the record keeping to know who has received the monies and who hasn't, and therefore who may see or receive these checks?
In the application process in either program, the applicants would need to assign their payments to the respective entity. The respective entity would then put those assignments to Treasury of Guam and Revenue Tax, and it will be the responsibility of those two agencies to make sure that all those names are flagged on the list, so that when the money comes in from the federal government, those that are flagged as having assigned their payments, their payments would go to wherever those payments were assigned.
All right, thank you, Congressman.
Hi, Congressman. This is Troy Torres with Kandit News. Good morning, and to you and to the senators and to your staff. I thought I heard an answer earlier, but I just wanted to be more clear about it, and if you could expound on it more. How does this local program differ from the War Claims Local Program, and why are you suggesting this? I'm talking about the public and private options.
When the local government moved forward with their program on the war claim side, the federal legislation was not passed. And so the movement of that local legislation presented a risk to the on the federal side because the passage of the law was still an issue. This law, the CARES Act, already passed.
Okay.
And so we already have very specific parameters on how certain individuals are going to get paid, how much they're going to be getting paid, how they're going to be identified. And so since the law already passed, we're just going to be using those exact parameters on this local program. And so we're not, the local government does not need to work with the federal government in any way because the law already passed and because the parameters are already clear.
Thank you, Congressman. Please forgive me if I'm stepping out of bounds here and if I need to take these questions elsewhere, but my question would be for the senators generally, where now that they've heard this presentation, what they feel about either the public or private option and also the suggestions for the getting unemployment relief to people through those lifelines. I'm very much interested to know whether this is something that has a chance of passing in the Guam legislature.
T, I think we need to unmute the speaker. Let's go ahead and keep all the senators unmuted as well.
Can you hear me now, Congressman?
Yes, we can hear you.
And I guess to answer Troy's question, I just sent a note out to both Senator Moylan and Senator Torres to see how we can move forward in facilitating this.
Thank you.
This is Senator Moreland. Likewise, I would be more than happy to work with my colleagues using this as to expedite the process to get money into the hands of our unemployed right now. I think both of these are very viable solutions, and we should look at them seriously and to come together to figure out which one would be best for the people of Guam. So I'm definitely open, and I thank you, Congressman, for those possible solutions, and those are great solutions. Thank you.
Congressman, top of the day, Congressman. It's May Habib here from PNC News. I think you mentioned it briefly earlier, but I just wanted to confirm, in terms of GITA, the GovGuam Retirement Fund, and the banking system, have we had even initial conversations with them to sort of determine their buy-in and their interest level for these programs, or would those conversations just be started now?
They would be started now. The first step would be the leaders that are on the line and our local legislature would need to enact this legislatively. They would need to provide the guarantee in legislation, and they would also need to create the special fund and commit the reimbursements to that fund for the purposes of funding the interest expense. And so the first step would be for our local leaders to stand this up. As part of that, I of course would advise them to do the necessary due diligence in communicating with the banks or communicating with the retirement fund as to the viability of the suggestion. But the reason why we're having this call with the legislature is because we want to put this on their radar. They're the first ones that need to determine if this is going to happen, and they're the ones who need to have these conversations with those respective entities.
So I guess just in follow-up to that, are you concerned, or maybe the senators on the line can answer this too, is there concern of resistance from these organizations that really aren't bought into these ideas at all?
I'm not concerned about the on the banking side because, again, financial institutions have historically, I've known of financial institutions on one that's historically doing tax refund loans, and so this wouldn't be too far of a stretch for that. As far as the retirement fund, this would be no different than them investing in any other debt instrument, but it would require them to do basically a direct investment on a security that's structured by GITA. So it would definitely be something different for them, and so their appetite for it is something that I'm not quite sure of. But I would venture to say that a 10% annualized rate of return on a guaranteed loan is something that if I was a financial institution, I would be very excited about it.
Okay, if I may just ask another question, moderator, if that's okay. Congressman, uh, do you have privacy concerns in terms of the public suggestion that you said, you'd mentioned that there were a lot of non-essential workers that are maybe teleworking or maybe not doing as much because they don't have the capacity of being in office. Do you have concerns about those employees going through thousands of tax returns and private information and social insurance numbers or social security numbers of Guam residents?
Oh, absolutely. That would be a very serious concern. That I would not engage that option unless the proper legal documentation was put into place to ensure that any individuals who are part of this process would be bound to necessary privacy requirements, and also the legislation should probably include a penalty, a very strict penalty for any violations of that. So the public option, because of that logistical concern, does create that additional risk, and that's something that would need to be mitigated legislatively. And that is something to definitely factor in when considering either of these two options for any of these programs.
Congressman,
Yes.
you're talking about the 10 million in advance war claims payment. Do you know if the government of Guam has already received this amount?
In my communications with Treasury, we're anticipating that within the next 2 weeks, that $10 million should be with the government of Guam. In my communications with Treasury, just for the benefit of the listening audience, we're also informed that Treasury will be sending vouchers or letters, basically, to the adjudicated claimants for them to be able to fill out information and send it back to Treasury for them to be able to receive their payment. I think the information that Treasury is going to be writing to the adjudicated claimants, it may be direct deposit information, if I'm not mistaken, or it could be information to revalidate mailing addresses. But that's basically the status of the war claims payments. But my understanding is we're anticipating Treasury to be able to meet that 10 million within the next 2 weeks.
Congressman, this is Troy Torres again.
Either way, with respect
Congressman?
either way, with respect to the 10 million being impaneled before these processes, either the public or private option is put into place. Both of these options involve paying the interest when the federal money comes in from the principal, and so the interest will definitely be in the bank before the principal, because I'm anticipating the war claim payments to be coming in a lot sooner than any of these programs that are currently in place.
Congressman, this is Troy Torres. Senator Mary Torres said something interesting. She said, time is our biggest enemy right now in fighting for these unemployment and cash assistance needs of our people, because as we go further down the line, things get compounded. And I wanted to know whether, along those lines, if this gets kicked down the line and money doesn't come to our people sooner rather than later, whether there would actually be also a liquidity issue with either the retirement fund or the banks as the economic situation on the island gets more bleak. So basically, is it better to do, it's better to do this now than it is to kick this down the line because of liquidity issues?
The information that we're getting about the banking sector in general from the Federal Reserve is that the banking system is strong, so that liquidity isn't too much of a factor. The Federal Reserve is already very committed to providing whatever liquidity banks need during this time in order to prevent any kind of financial crisis. So I'm not too concerned about liquidity on the private option going through the banks for financing.
Okay.
On the retirement fund option, the balance of their fund is pretty much the capital that we're discussing there. They basically need to do their own risk assessment on that, but there could be liquidity concerns if the balance of their fund continues to suffer as a result of market declines. But I'm not privy to their investments or their investment management policies, so I'm not sure what their liquidity situation is or how much of this they'll be able to actually capitalize. It's just being suggested in this call because it is really the only resource on the government side where we would be able to, through an indenture, access in excess of $140 million.
So the time concern essentially
Congressman?
is the time concern essentially is the focus on getting
Senators,
families.
can you hear me?
Yes.
This is Maureen Maritita. May I ask a question?
Sure, go ahead, Maureen.
So, Congressmen, senators, given the state of the private sector employees, do you or they think there is any way that payments could or should be prioritized for the private sector, people who do not have a salary like the government of Guam employees?
This program would not discriminate between public or private because the application will be based on tax returns. And so the tax returns aren't going to be prioritized based on public or private employment. Any applicant who submits a legitimate tax return to the on the application will be, I would say, prioritized in chronological order. I think that's how the banks would do it. I definitely don't think this program is going to be favoring either the public or private sector. I think it's going to be available to if it gets turned on, it'll be available based on applications and in order of when they're received.
And Maureen, if I may also add to that, I think one of the things, this is Mary Torres, that we're concerned about is while the government has a lot of things in play with regard to differential pay for line item people, for leave considerations, for their employees who are staying at home, the private sector doesn't have this luxury. And even in some of our families, we're experiencing that where, I, for example, am thinking about my children who have to work and their needs and their childcare needs and all the things that go with that. So I think that this sort of, and I welcome this sort of conversation because it allows us then to have a level playing field of sorts where people who desperately need to access a bridge type of financing or a bridge loan in anticipation of the federal monies can get it as quickly as they can. And I think that's really the discussion here is, while we have a lot of things in play for our government employees right now, I think that this is that other consideration that we're hopefully going to attempt to implement for everyone else out there. Clearly the small business sector is what holds Guam up, and many of us are very concerned about that collapse on top of our tourism industry, which will take a little bit of time to recover, not only in Guam, but globally. So, definitely have to think about Guam now as a community at large. And I think that these measures are those sorts of efforts that, can tap on the community at large.
And so one other question then, if I may, to the Congressman. You used a figure of about 116,000 individuals to include children. And so by your calculations, you think that the 10 million would cover that?
The 10 million would cover, it depends on the interest on the interest rate. And so, for example, if we were to go with the private option and have the 10 million guarantee a 5% interest rate, that would access $200 million worth of credit facility. $200 million divided by 1,200, which is the maximum, would cover 166,000 people. And again, these applications and the parameters for receiving the payments, like nobody can make more than 75,000, and then it begins a sliding scale down to about 98,000.
Yes.
We're not, the 1,200 is a high-end estimate. And so I'm confident that between $140 million to $200 million should be sufficient to be able to capitalize either of these programs.
Thank you.
Congressman now recognizing Heidi with a question.
Congressman, can you clarify again? So those individuals who haven't filed tax returns because they are part of the day job economy, they don't fall under any of these programs? that you're talking about? Can you clarify that? For those who have not filed tax returns or who are unable to do so.
This program would require a tax return to be filed. The documentation would need to be there in order for the process to be able to have that guarantee that any of these cash advances are actually going to be funded at the back end when the federal money comes in. That being said, I think everybody who has worked should be filing taxes. I've been getting a lot of questions from people, and it's pretty amazing how a lot of people come out of the woodwork who have not been very honest with their tax filings, and they say, I made money, but I haven't filed, and can I still get this? And it's like, you got to go file. So I encourage everybody who has income in 2018 or 2019 to go and file. The sooner you file, the sooner you'll be able to have the document to avail of either of these programs. And the sooner you file, the sooner you'll be on the listing for the federal money if you don't avail of either of these programs. Also, it's my understanding that the IRS is going to be rolling out a simplified filing document for those who want to file for 2019 and do so for the sake of this program. And I would definitely build that application in with either of these two programs at the local level, so that anybody who does file using that simplified process can still have that validation to avail of these programs. And so, long story short, Heidi, if there's no filing, the individual won't be able to avail of the program. The filing is, I'm not just talking about these programs, I'm talking about even the federal program. The filings is the validation of who's paid. And so everybody's encouraged to file. People have been asking me, I haven't gotten my W-2. You don't need to wait for W-2. I urge everybody to file and get your names on the tax rolls so that you can be a part of all of this relief that's coming down.
So, Congressman, those unemployed can only avail of that Lifeline loan program that any banks may want to offer?
If the local government authorizes a Lifeline loan program statutorily by guaranteeing the interest with the appropriations, that can be structured however the local government wants to. I would recommend that it not exceed the $600 because that's the guaranteed amount for the next 4 months. And I will be very cautious about allowing individuals to max that out anyway, because you're going to take all that money up front, and then in the back end you're going to run out of money when the federal money starts kicking in on the unemployment side. But it's all getting eaten up by the assignments that you made up front. And that's why I would recommend doing this as a Lifeline process, where you do it just for like a very small amount, so that when the federal money does start kicking in and the unemployment income does start turning out, you still have something in your pocket, and it's not all going to pay a whole bunch of cash advances. And the local government needs to be mindful of that if they were to structure something like that. It should be for a Lifeline process, so that people who desperately need money now can access $100, maybe $200. And I know the people listening are probably saying, that's nothing. I need more than that. I understand. What we're talking about here is just trying to create a holdover mechanism so that people aren't going hungry. That's what we're trying to address here. But the unemployment, I think the unemployment issue should, on the big picture, be addressed by the full program that the local government sets up with the federal government. If the local government wants to create a Lifeline process, I would recommend that it has these narrow parameters in order to make sure that it doesn't put money into people's pockets up front, only to have them have no money in their pockets as the weeks and months go on with this.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions from any of our media partners on the line?
Yes, Congressman, it's May Habib from PNC News again. I wanted was wondering if you could comment about maybe some socioeconomic divisions that would be created with access to internet. I've heard you say several times that it would be a very online focused system if it does launch, these suggestions. And not everybody on our island, if we know this, has access to internet. So how would you kind of mitigate that?
Well, I'm recommending the online part of it because we're trying to maximize social distancing. Because the reality is, if we turn something like this on, we're going to see people inundating banks in person, and that's going to exacerbate the health risk. And as much as I want to make people's money available to them as quickly as possible, I don't want to create a mad rush to the banks where people are congregating at a time when we're trying to prevent that as much as possible. That being said, the suggestion to have this done online as part of the mandate, I would recommend that for the social distancing aspect, but it doesn't need to be exclusive to that. You could allow for people to apply in person. I don't think that should necessarily be restricted, but it should very much be discouraged. I think that the online application process should be quick and easy. I think that because the local government is going to be the guarantor and the interest is pretty much going to be guaranteed, there really shouldn't be too much underwriting on the loan when people apply online. As a matter of fact, if they provide the necessary documentation, there really shouldn't be any underwriting at all because it's guaranteed that the money coming in, the local government's going to be the backstop, the interest is already funded. And so doing it online would be the fastest way. Making that be as convenient as possible would keep people from going into the banks. I want to discourage that as much as possible because we don't need people congregating during this time. But if anybody does not have online access, absolutely, I think that they should be able to go into their financial institution and do this in person.
Okay, thank you, Congressman. If I may, just one more follow-up. In your media advisory yesterday, you said that this could possibly expedite payments locally, down to 1 week, as soon as 1 week. With all the structures and agreements and the legal power that it would take to really get all these agreements in place, what realistic timeline would we be looking at? Are you still thinking money can be doled out as soon as next week?
I think that the public option would be a lot more cumbersome. I think the private option would be a lot faster to implement. Financial institutions have given out tax refund loans in the past, so this really wouldn't be any different in terms of their documentation and structuring. They would need to definitely kick their MIS butts and get their websites to be able to receive these applications online if we wanted to make that be a requirement. I think that on the private side, the bigger delay would be how quickly we can get the legislation crafted and passed and signed into law. And then from there, the only delay would be how quickly local financial institutions will be able to create the online application process in conformance with whatever parameters were set in the statute. I think that can be done in a week. I know the financial institutions on our island have very, very talented MIS folks who can really get applications up onto their websites relatively quickly. They would need to do that in conformance with the statute, so the statute would first need to be passed, and the legislature would need to draft the bill and get that done. And I know how fast our legislature can work with very, very talented people in there on the staff side, and so I really think that the mandate can be crafted within 24 hours if everybody burns the midnight oil, and the legislature can go into session, get it passed, and the banks can get to work on getting the applications up on their websites. So I think that between the two options, the fastest one would be the private option, and I think that one, if everybody moves aggressively, because I think the entire island, financial institutions, local government, we all know the desperation. I think 1 week is something that we can do. I think Guam can do this. I have confidence in that.
Okay, Congressman, thank you so much.
This is Maureen from the Business Journal again. So you're not saying it's an either-or scenario. We might possibly have both, private and public.
I would, if we're going to do this, I would definitely bifurcate it so that one is used for one. So, for example, I would use a private option maybe to fund the economic impact payments, and perhaps consider the public option to create an unemployment funding mechanism. That way, you're not intermingling two programs into a single payee list. I would very much recommend that you keep it separate, but you can definitely use both facilities. I wouldn't intermingle them to fund any single one. I would keep them separate so that one financing mechanism is funding one program. One funds unemployment, one funds economic impact payments.
Okay, thank you.
Congressman, actually, this is for Speaker Tina Munya Barnes. I saw the wheels turning in her head since that last question. So, Speaker, my questions are you guys willing to burn the midnight oil on this legislation, and are you going to call session within a day of the legislation being crafted?
Well, first of all, Troy, thank you. I just want to say to the Congressman, I will definitely be reaching out to the banks, to the retirement, to get their input, and saying I hope to continue to work closely with our Congressman and his staff to have him answer any of the federal mechanisms that may be needed, but also more importantly, as we look at trying to get funding and resources to all of our residents here on Guam, I think it's important that we continue to work on avenues like this and work closely with my colleagues to see how we can facilitate these things moving forward. And I just want to say, Congressman, again, on Masi, for giving us the opportunity to share your perspective. And I will definitely be reaching out to the banks and to the retirement to see how we, to get their input, to see how we can facilitate this programs moving forward.
I also would like to add, though, Congressman, that the biggest thing here to get this whole cog going is the release of the funds from the Treasury to reimburse Guam for the war claims. I think that is the first thing that has to happen is to get that money available. The second thing is to partner with the government or the governor of Guam with an understanding that that money will be dedicated to pay any interest on these bridge loans. So, those two components have to go in. And I think the speaker, clear to me, the logistics of the bill have to be worked out and the mechanisms. But I think first and foremost, fundamentally, do we have that 10 million reimbursement available to us within the next week or two to even begin making these propositions to the banks or to GIDA, or to the banks, I'm sorry. And secondly, is the governor open to dedicating those monies? And, I assume that as with any governor, you've got your eye on where funds are needed and may be dedicated. So there has to be that understanding as well before we can even proceed. But I also pledge my support to the speaker and my colleagues in trying to craft a sensible solution. If in fact we need an interim that we can enact locally, then I'd be very much inclined to get on board that effort, especially if it'll affect the private sector, who I think right now we must focus on, and not causing that small business sector to collapse. I mean, that's one of my greatest fears right now for our island.
And Congressman, on that same note, I just want to say if you can assist us in the efforts on that reimbursement, anything that you do that can help us out get those reimbursements to our government.
Yeah, we've already communicated with Treasury. Treasury's already informed us that they're in the process of getting that to the local government as quickly as possible. In terms of structure of waiting, I wouldn't necessarily wait for the money to come in to begin structuring the legislation. It can all be subject to. Another option is, that 10 million is coming in based on the MOU, assuming that MOU is enforceable, which I'm confident it is. We don't need to specifically say it's war claim money that we're waiting for. The local government reappropriate from somewhere else and use it to capitalize the interest, and then backfill that reappropriation with the 10 million when it does come in. So I wouldn't necessarily wait for that. I would say that that should be the source of funds for the interest. But if we're going to, we don't need to wait for that source of funds to come in order to move the program. We can reappropriate from someplace else and backfill it with that money when it comes in.
Yeah, actually, I was going to ask about that. The not so much relying on that one source of money, but on other sources of money within the government of Guam. Senators, is that something that you're willing to look at as well? At least as
I
a...
think that would be a very big challenge right now, to reappropriate money. I mean, we have such trouble just squeezing money. Even the governor, when she moved money around to fund public health for $4 million, there was a lot of heartburn from many of the agencies who were affected by that transferring of money around in this time of emergency. So I would think that the easiest really would be to dedicate that money, which right now is not in anybody's radar in terms of what was appropriated. So I mean, that's my estimate. And I think once you start appropriating, you get into a big, long, drawn-out discussion on the legislative floor about justifying it. So in my estimate, the quickest would be to dedicate the war claims funds, because that's something that is out there and it doesn't directly impact any line agency's budget presently. So that would be my call, for expediency's sake anyways.
I have a question to the speaker.
Yes, please proceed.
This is Heidi with the Post. Mrs. Speaker, can you clarify how soon will you be able to call for a session? If not for the Congressman's proposals, then the other proposals from other senators?
Heidi, what we would need to do is I continue to work closely with my Committee on Rules chair and my colleagues to see how soon we can expedite. There are provisions in the standing rules that say I can call emergency session as fast as 2 hours, but I'm making sure that we literally look at everything that we have before us and all the bills that are presently on as it relates to COVID-19. But I need to work closely with my colleagues and the Committee on Rules. And we do know that based on all the bills that have been introduced, we do have some hearing waivers that need to be filled out, and a lot of that has not been fully detailed to me, so I patiently wait for all of those.
Senators?
As of this hour, there is no schedule. There is no session scheduled.
I am continuing to work closely with our colleagues.
Thank you.
Senators, to clarify on that $10 million, I just had a thought about it. Though the $10 million in cash hasn't actually come in, if I'm not mistaken, the legislature has already recognized that revenue through the local war claims legislation. Wouldn't that be correct? So it is money that the legislature is able to appropriate because it's revenue.
Troy, Section E, if I'm not mistaken, of Bill 181 says that the legislature has to reappropriate the funds.
Yes.
That goes back to the war claims.
Yes. So it is money that the legislature could go in and appropriate then, because it is already recognized revenue.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you, Speaker. Thank you for clarifying that.
Thank you, Troy.
Congressman, if I may ask, and this isn't so much about the local program, this is more about the federal unemployment program altogether, and I hope that your federal insight can help answer this. There's been questions about people with reduced hours at their work, or some businesses that have had to take austerity measures, like implementing a 10, 20, 30% pay cut across the board. So they're not necessarily laid off or furloughed or displaced in that way, but they are facing austerity measures at their work. Do you know if the federal unemployment program has any sort of support for those people?
My knowledge, it can, but I'm hesitant to make any commitments on those kind of things, because at the end of the day, it depends on what program the local government builds out with the Secretary of Labor. So I do know that it can fund reductions in hours. But whether or not that's included in the logo program that's finally implemented, I do not know.
Okay, thank you, Congressman.
Do we have any further questions?
Congressman, I just wanted to say I really like that backdrop of the Last Supper you got back there. And my only question is,
I'm in the kitchen. Okay, sorry.
I love it. But my only question remaining is, how are you and your family doing? You've been talking to us a lot about business stuff, but you haven't told us how you and your family are doing.
Everyone's doing good. We're getting stir crazy like everybody else, kind of staying within the four walls. Just playing very, very safe. The virus is all over the country, and we're blessed. We're blessed to be able to still have everybody in our family healthy. But I lose a lot of sleep over Guam. One of the reasons why we conceptualized this was it's not even a federal program that we're talking about here on this call. This is entirely local. But I kind of just put my financial advisor hat on and my former senator hat on, Madam Speaker, and just try to conceptualize something that we can do. So the family's okay, but Dad's very busy. We're running almost a 24-hour operation because aside from doing the work and taking the calls and keeping us front and center on the Congress side during the day, I get inundated with so many messages from our people, reaching out, asking questions, expressing their desperation, and I'll stay up 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, just constantly responding because people they need that reassurance that somebody's listening. So we're burning the midnight oil, and the family's been very gracious about being understanding that Dad has a lot of work to do, but we have a whole island to take care of. And we're committed to doing that. And I wanted to just thank our senators who are present for their work and their commitment as well. Our island very much needs all of us who they elected to represent them and to be leaders for them to really do everything that we possibly can during these times. And we're doing that. But thank you for asking.
Last question for the speaker, please, if I may. This is Maureen from the Business Journal. Speaker, when do you estimate that the legislature can consider some of the bills? Are we talking 1 week, 2 weeks, a month out?
I'm trying to work as fast as we possibly can. And again, working closely with our Committee on Rules, our legal counsel, and the support of my colleagues, we will get to session as fast as we possibly can.
So if I may politely push you on that, would we be talking a week or 2 weeks or a month?
Again, Maureen, I will continue to share with you that as soon as we get the logistical parameters set up and working through with the Committee on Rules and making sure that everything is in proper navigation to have this hearing, we will work on that. But again, it is really important to say that the standing rules does provide us to go into session as fast as 2 hours.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
If we have no further questions, I would like to afford an opportunity to any of our senators to make us any parting remarks, any shout outs to our people. I know that a lot of them are very, very concerned and they're just looking for any kind of reassurances out there. So I'll turn it over to us.
Thank you so very much, Congressman, for affording us the opportunity to join the Zoom in with you. I think it's really important that our community continue to hear that we are all working, from the congressional office to the 35th Guam legislature to the administration and our Magahaga and our Segundo Magalay. I think it's important that we all come together and truly literally put our community before anything else, and look at the opportunities that are in front of us and what we need to work on. And I just want to say thank you again for literally giving us the opportunity to Zoom in with you and continue to find solutions that will help get resources back into the hands of all, not just the few, but all the residents of Guam. Si Jules Masi and si Jules Andrini DC, how must Congressman San Nicolas and Hamza Todos.
Senator Torres, any comments? Senator Moynihan?
Yes, Congressman, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to have this discussion, unrehearsed and totally cold. But I think, this is an indication of the type of collaboration that we need in these times, where it's about discussions and ideas and who's willing to execute, the solutions. And thank you very much for including me in this process. But I just want to say to everyone out there, we're all in this boat together. And I think that the more that we do our parts equally, the sooner we'll be able to get on with our lives and, have the freedoms that now we realize we're sorely missing. The freedom to move about, the freedom to hug, the freedom to just go about our daily lives. But, it's a test really to the discipline. And one thing too I want to impart is the fact that we're often called upon as government leaders to do our part, to act, but we can only go so far. Action is really not for us to do, but for all of us to engage in. So it's not anyone's responsibility to make somebody behave morally and responsibly. So let's all just continue to be on par in that regard, do our part responsibly to make sure that we're all collectively okay. And Seduce Maasi, and thank you also for burning the midnight oil. You were up quite late last night. I was, in fact, when we were discussing getting the link for this call, I had noticed that you were up quite late into the night. So please also take care of yourself, Congressman, so you can do our part in Washington for Guam.
Senator, appreciate that. Senator Jim?
Thank you, Congressman. I appreciate your solutions, the two solutions you offered to us. Those are excellent for my consideration, both the public and the private. And in addition, the lifeline option too, you've recommended for the unemployed. So these are solutions that I'm happy to hear, and I want to take some action on it. And I understand from your thorough explanation that this does not affect the federal money that we are expecting, and it won't harm that at all. So that's excellent. I'll be up late working with my staff here, especially to draft some bills and get things going for my colleagues' consideration. And hopefully we'll be ready for this soon-to-be session, and that we can finally help the people and get things going for the island of Guam. So thank you very much, Congressman, for these excellent solutions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator Jim and Senator Torres, and thank you, Speaker. And again, thank you for taking this call. I made sure to include the three of you on this one because you guys were the three that showed up for our last one, and I really appreciate that. You guys are also the first local government officials to reach out to my office directly for us to have these dialogues, and we're very grateful for all the work that you're doing back home. And I just wanted to let the people of Guam know that, we're losing sleep for you. We're doing everything that we possibly can. We're going to turn over every stone and come up with every creative idea that we can squeeze out of our brains because we know that you're hurting. We know that you're scared, and we're here for you. We're working hard for you, and we're going to do everything that we can to try and make this turn out with as little pain as possible. Although I know that there's a lot of suffering and a lot of challenges, but we're going to do everything that we can. And I guess we'll go ahead and conclude here. I just wanted to say, God bless Guam and God bless the United States and God bless everybody everywhere. We're all one big world going through this, and we're going to do everything that we can to save lives and to make sure that people don't suffer as badly as they would if we weren't at the wheel as best we can be. God bless you guys. Thank you all so much. Thank you to our media partners.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.